It's February 22nd, aka 222, and no, I'm not talking about numerology. We serve a God who also loves numbers. He loves them so much that he created a book with the title Numbers. But that's not where we are. We are in Acts chapter 22, which is so fun because that means it is the 22nd day of my series, The Facts of Acts February, where I'm going through the entire book of Acts, all 28 chapters for all 28 days of February. So, the last we left off, Paul was beginning to speak to the crowd at Jerusalem because they were trying to get this man arrested. They were also beating him. The Roman commander ends up grabbing him and trying to take him into the barracks, and he asks the Roman commander, can he talk to the crowd? And so Paul starts speaking to the crowd, and once he does, he begins to speak to them in Aramaic, which causes them to become completely quiet. The first thing he does is greets them as his brothers and his fathers, not even his brothers and his sisters, but he's respecting even his elders are in the crowd amongst these rioters. And he begins to tell them about his own upbringing, his history, and his testimony. He starts from the absolute beginning, saying that he was born in Tarsus, but that he was raised in Jerusalem and that he studied under respected religious leaders and was thoroughly trained in their Jewish law. He relates to them, sharing that he has the same zeal for God as they do, and that zeal at the time was used to persecute the people that was following the way, which we know as the Christians, to not only persecute them, but to imprison them, to beat them, both women and men alike. He didn't care what you were. If you were talking anything about the movement of the way, which again is the early church, he was throwing you in jail. He was persecuting you. And he even confirmed, saying that the high priest and the council can testify to this. Y'all know who I was. It got to the point to where he was even taking these letters that were being sent by the community of the way to find out where they were going next. In this situation, it was Damascus, to bring them back to Jerusalem to imprison them. And he begins to share his testimony about what happened to him on the road to Damascus. He shares about the bright light flashing, and he hears a voice asking, why are you persecuting me, Paul? And the voice confirms that it is the Lord Jesus of Nazareth. He also tells him that the light was so bright that he was blinded. So all he's hearing is this voice amongst being blinded by this bright, exuberant light. He even shares that his companions even saw this light and that they heard this voice, but they couldn't understand it. I just don't believe it was for them. Now, this is my own opinion in this regard. It makes me wonder, was this just for Paul? And I believe it absolutely was. And so again, because he's blinded, he has his companions bring him into Damascus by the hand. And he shares about meeting Ananias and Ananias prophesying to him. And he even expresses that Ananias is this well-respected, devout observer of the Jewish law. He goes on to share that Ananias restores his sight by placing his hands on him and prophesying to him about God's plans for Paul's life. And he instructs him to go and be baptized and to wash away his sins, the sins of him being this man who was persecuting all these people. So he then begins to share with them that he returns to Jerusalem and that he went to go pray in the temple, and that during that prayer, God places him into a trance and God begins to speak to him. And he shares with the crowd that God is telling him in this trance to leave the city of Jerusalem. And he's telling him to leave because the people there won't accept his testimony about Jesus. And in that moment, Paul is even responding to God, expressing his wrongdoings, confessing about the imprisoning and the beating of Jesus's followers, even to the point of standing by during Stephen's death, which we saw in earlier chapters of Acts. That was actually where we met Paul. He was standing there approving of them beating and murdering Stephen, who we know to be one of the first martyrs of the early church. And what I love about God is that he doesn't even reply to that. He just tells him to leave and that God will send him far away to be amongst the Gentiles. Now, the crowd was listening up until Paul said this. Once Paul said that, they were just rioting all over again. They weren't trying to have it. They were just over it. So they began to scream and say that the world be rid of him and that he's not even fit to live. The commander is seeing this interaction unfold and he doesn't understand what's going on because he doesn't speak the language. So because of this and because of their reaction, he ends up instructing them to go ahead and take Paul into the barracks for a flogging, which we know to be a beating, and an interrogation as well. Now, what I love about Paul is that he stays calm, and while they're literally prepping him to be flogged and beaten, he leans over and he says to the centurion, is it legal for y'all to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't been found guilty? So of course the centurion is like, what'd you just say? And so he runs to the commander. He tells the commander comes back and he talks to Paul. He's like, is this true? Are you a Roman citizen? And Paul says, yeah, I am. And then he was like, it's expensive to buy your citizenship. And Paul was like, I didn't need to buy anything. I was born here. This This alarms him. He freaks out. He immediately withdraws this interrogation and the prep to be beaten. And he was so freaked out upon finding out about Paul's citizenship and that he had just placed a Roman citizen in chains. Him being born there actually places Paul in a higher status category than the commander, which again, hence his freak out. But as I said, he withdraws, and that is where chapter 22 ends, is him being not necessarily released. We don't know that yet, but we know that they are withdrawing from the interrogation as of right now. We will find out where they decide to go next with this story tomorrow in chapter 23. I'll see y'all then.